Good morning. It's Monday, January 21st, and welcome to week 4 of Judicial Process. So just a few announcements to touch base. Okay, so I would like to remind you to keep posting at least once a week to your personal learning journal. And that only has to be 3 or 4 sentences. Again, just being self-conscious about your learning. It can be anything from I found that if I study earlier in the morning, it tends to be more productive. It can even just be a discussion of an interesting connection you made in your learning. Wow, I found it really interesting that this process in criminal process is not unlike this biological process I learned about, or just, whatever it is about your learning that's interesting to you and useful. A reminder, and I've got this week's calendar page posted below, that the oral argument essay is due Tuesday. There's now a study guide for the 3rd exam posted and available, and the exam opens on Wednesday and will be available until the end of day on Saturday, the 26th. Don't forget, this week you should definitely be making plans of how you're going to see your judicial process for your court observation essay. And remember, let me remind you again, you do not have to view a trial procedure. Trials are actually kind of rare. You are to view a public judicial proceeding. It could be jury selection, it could be pretrial motions, it could be sentencing, anything like that. So you can do it either via Zoom, and I've got a link to some proceedings that you can view live. And then the other option, of course, is to go to an actual courtroom. If you can and you feel safe, that's definitely the way to go, because most of what happens, well, I shouldn't say it that way. A lot of what happens in the judicial process happens slightly, outside of it, kind of process adjacent, if you will. So you might see a prosecutor and a defense attorney have a quick conference in the hall, or you might see an officer and a prosecutor have a quick conference in the hall, and then something is settled and a proceeding that was going to happen that day is no longer happening. So it's really interesting to watch it in person. But if it's not possible, or you don't feel safe because of the virus, then by all means take advantage of one of the virtual processes of doing that. And then I just wanted to say we have one more week on our discussion on judicial selection. The last 2 postings are due. The first one was due Friday, and so there's a posting on the 22nd, which is tomorrow, Tuesday, and then a last posting on by Saturday. And obviously you can do any of these earlier than that. These are just suggestions to keep going, because I've noticed a lot of you already have made your 2nd or even your 3rd posting already. So that's great, and that's fantastic. The discussion on judicial selection was really interesting, with a majority of you advocating for partisan elections, a couple of you for nonpartisan elections, and then Elizabeth discussed the merit selection models. I got to thinking, I've just been doing some reading this morning as a result of being stimulated by you guys discussing judicial selection. I Googled international comparisons of judicial selections, and I found that in general, each country is really specific if you're going to look at the details. And like the CIA's fact book puts together information about a lot of about every country in the world, and one of their entries is on judicial selection, and they have a really in-depth discussion of how each country does it. But in general, 4 models emerge. One is judicial selection by the judiciary itself. And I should preface this by saying there's 2 things that you want in a judiciary. You want a judiciary that's somewhat accountable, but not as accountable as your elected your traditional elected officials, because we think of the executive and the legislative branches as highly political, and rightly so. But judges are applying law, and yes, they do make law when they're applying law, but in general, we want them to be less political. So there's judicial independence is a value, but also some degree of accountability, and different models emphasize different things. So judicial partisan election, you have much less judicial independence because judges feel dependent upon pleasing a public. So there's, anyway, there's 4 general models. One is the model of the judicial institution itself picking its judges, and they tend to base that on degree of training, number of years, and so forth. A second model is a combination of the other institutions of government, like the legislative body and the executive, and some combination. So, and that's describes ours. The executive appoints at the federal level, and the Senate confirms. So institutions of government choosing. A third model is elections, although at the highest levels, only 2 countries engage in elections. Let's see if I can remember what they were. And now I can't remember what they were. Sorry about that. Getting old is a bitch. I should have written it down. And then the final model is some sort of hybrid with judicial commissions composed of a variety of people, some from the, always try to have a variety of political ideologies represented, and different positions, lawyers, judges, politicians, members of the public at large, come up with some sort of short list, and then it's given to different people, sometimes an executive, sometimes then an election in the legislature based on this list. So the variations of each model are really varied. So anyway, I thought it was a really interesting discussion, and keep going. You guys are doing great.